Today, I want to show you how to take this image and a couple others to create this underwater composite effect in GIMP. How cool is that? I love it. Hello, my name is Chris Parker, and it is my desire to help you elevate your photography and editing skills in GIMP. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel so you can continue elevating your GIMP skills. So if you're ready to create this underwater composite, let's do it. So the first thing we need to do is open up an image for our background. And this image you can download for free on Pexels, as well as some other files that I'm going to be using for this project. All of them are free. You can find the links to download them in the description below. So go ahead and download those files and open up this one so we can get started. So the first thing we're going to do is go up to image and select scale image. Type in 1800 for the width. Height should be 24. Click your scale button and it will resize accordingly. Let's go back to image and adjust the canvas size because I want this hole here to be closer to the top. So I'm going to type in, let's do 1900 for the height. Make sure they're unlocked so that the width stays the same. Down here we have our preview and it's showing it's cropping the bottom. I don't want the bottom cropped. So I'm going to click and drag this up right about there. Click resize. And now the image has been cropped accordingly. Let's hold down our control key, shift key plus the letter J, and that will auto zoom the image to fit within the interface like so. Let's duplicate this layer. I'm going to double click and call this original. I'm going to call this one dark because what I want to do first is make this layer darker. It's too bright right now, definitely in the shadows. So let's go up to colors and let's select curves. I'm going to click in the middle and drag down to right about there. Go ahead and click OK. All right, we are now ready to add our water image file. So I'm going to click and drag it over the canvas and it will be added as a new layer. I want to resize this larger, so let's go to layer, scale layer, type in 6000 for the width, 4500 for the height, and click scale. Now I'm going to grab my move tool with the letter M, and then I'm going to move this down and to the right. These three bubbles right here, I'm going to place right about there. Now I'm doing that for my own personal preference based on what I did previously with this project when I was practicing creating this tutorial. And that's what I found worked best for me. You can use whatever works best for you. Now, the only problem is this particular image, it looks like somebody added a hand to the original file. So I'm not sure whoever uploaded this added this or not, but I want to get rid of that hand. So I'm going to grab my heal tool with the letter H, and then I need to give GIMP a reference point to fix or remove that hand from another part of the image. So let's hold down our control key and click right about here. And now that is the reference point that GIMP will use to cover up the hand once we begin painting over it. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to blend this layer in with the layer below by changing the blending mode. So let's go up here, click on mode and select HSL color. Now I want to duplicate this layer. Let's go ahead and call this color and click right here to duplicate it. And then this time we're going to call this one hard light. And we're going to change the blending mode to hard light. That way we can see those bubbles coming through. Now that's a little too intense, so I'm going to drop the opacity down to around 50. So the next step is to create some light rays coming through this hole here. So we're going to assume that the sun is shining up here and we're going to create some rays coming down into the water to give us a little bit more depth and perspective and more character to our underwater image. So let's click right here and let's call the layer rays. Make sure it's set to transparency and click OK. We're going to use our gradient tool to make our rays. So you can grab that with the letter G. And then in your gradients panel, you want to find a gradient, a pre-made gradient that already has some lines to it, like this brushed aluminum or the one I think I used was this one here, Flare Raise Size 1. And if you're not seeing your gradients panel, go up to Windows Dockable Dialogs and select Gradients from here. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to click right up here towards the center of this hole, and I'm going to click and drag down like so. Now we do have some anchors here, and these are for each of the different rays and the width of those rays. So we can click on these and adjust these to make those rays a different size, a different width, etc. So you can adjust these to your own liking. I'm going to adjust this one up here to make it a little bit smaller, so something like that. And if you want, if you can get to that bottom circle, you can change and rotate the rays as needed, which I'm actually going to do. I'm going to move this up here like so, so that these dark ones here are up at the top. Once you're happy with your rays and the position, go ahead and hit enter or return. Let's go back to the layers here. And then we're going to go up here to our blending mode and change the mode to hard light. And I also want to drop the opacity down as well. I also want to take this layer and move it down below these two layers here so that they blend in with the water, so it looks like it's funneling that light through the water. Now what we need to do is add a layer mask in white. And what I want to do is I want to remove these rays up here at the top because they look a little out of place. So let's grab our brush tool with the letter P. Make sure your foreground color is set to black, and then paint over those rays to remove them. Let's grab our dark layer now and let's duplicate that again. I'm going to call this highlight because what I want to do is I want to create an area around this hole that is much brighter than it is now, because that light that is funneling through might be spilling over along the edges, and I want to create a brighter area here to represent that spillover. So we're going to use our dodge and burn tool for this. So Shift plus D to select it. In your tool options, scroll all the way down and make sure you have dodge selected. Opacity, I'm going to set that to around 50 so I can slowly build that up instead of applying it all at once. I'm using my scroll bar now to make a larger brush, and then I'm just going to paint over this area like so. Now, if you find you're adding too much, you can always adjust the opacity of that layer to blend it in with the one below to kind of tone it down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put that right around 70. All right, we are now ready to add our model here. So I'm going to grab that file and drag it over to add it as a new layer. She's a little too big. So let's grab our scale layer here in the layer menu. And let's resize this. Let's try 1400 for the width. Click scale. I think I'm going to go a little bit lower. Let's try 1200 and click scale again. Okay, let's drop the opacity here to see her a little bit better in her environment. I'm going to grab my move tool with the letter M, and I'm just going to kind of position her here. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to drag her all the way up to the top so I can see her a little bit better. So something like that. All right, let's put the opacity back to 100. And now we need to make a selection so we can remove the background from this layer. So there's a lot of different options for making your selection. So I'm going to use the free select tool to make a quick selection around her. And then I'm going to fine tune my selection with the quick mask mode, which is my preferred method of making selections. You can also try using the foreground select tool, which I have another tutorial on, to make a selection that way. And then you can fine tune the selection based on your preferred method of fine tuning that selection. So I'm not making it perfect, as you can see, and that's because with the quick mask mode, I can quickly paint over the areas that I need to add or remove from the selection. So once I get back to the beginning here, I get that little yellow circle. Once I release, I have my selection. I'm going to come down here and click right here to activate the quick mask mode. everything in red is not part of the selection. With my zoom tool selected, I can go ahead and zoom in. Then I grab my paintbrush tool with the letter P, so I can then begin painting with black and white to remove parts of that selection as needed. So right now, because I'm adding a red overlay, that means I'm removing from the selection. So again, go ahead and use the method of making selections that you prefer. And I'm going to go ahead and speed up this part of the video because there's not much else to share at this point, except for if you want to navigate around different parts of the interface as you're working on this, hold down your space bar. That'll give you the hand tool, and then you can move around to different parts of the image as you're zoomed in or while you're zoomed in. All right, so that took a lot longer than I was expecting. So the foreground select tool may have been a better tool to use for making the selection. Either way, I'm already done. So I'm gonna hold down Control-Shift+J to zoom all the way out. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn off quick mask mode now by clicking right here, or you can use Shift+Q, and we have our selection. Now we wanna add a layer mask by coming over here. Make sure you have selection selected, click add, and boom, the background is now gone. How cool is that? All right, Control-Shift+A to deselect. Let's go up to layer and select layer to image size to change the layer boundary size to match our canvas. All right, now let's take this layer and move it below the rays. Now we're starting to get that underwater effect for her as well. It looks like she's in the water, but we need to do some fine tuning, and we need to add a drop shadow as well. Let's first duplicate this layer. I'm going to call this Model Original. Let's go ahead and hide it. We're going to right click on this layer and select Apply Layer Mask. We're going to double click and call this Contrast plus Highlights, because we need to add a little contrast to her right now because it's a little flat. So let's go up to Colors and select Curves. I'm going to increase the highlights like so. I'm going to grab the shadows and drag those down, and maybe drag the black point in just a little bit like so. Okay, we have some more contrast, and she's not as flat as she was before. Now, the one thing I think we forgot to do was blur out these bubbles. They're a little too intense right now. So I'm going to go up to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to increase the size here to around 5 to 7, just to blend them in a little bit. There we go. I think that looks better. I'm going to do the same for the color one as well. So I'm going to grab that layer. If we go back to filters though, all we have to do is select Repeat Gaussian Blur here, or use Control+F to apply that blur to that layer. All right, so it's starting to blend in a little bit better. I'm going to grab my rays again and drop the opacity down just a little bit more, something like that. Now I do want to go back to my Contrast plus Highlights layer here and grab my Dodge and Burn tool. And I do want to apply some dodging to her arm and maybe a little bit on her face, because this part of her body is closer to that hole. So it should be brighter in that area here versus down here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase my brush size here a little bit. And let's see where the opacity is. 48, that's good. So I'm just going to paint over her arm a little bit here and a little bit on her face here, like so. Maybe a little bit more right here. There we go. All right, so that looks like it's getting more light now. All right, we are now going to create our drop shadow to add a little bit more realism to our composite. So let's duplicate this layer, double click on it, call it Drop Shadow. And we do need to bring this layer all the way up to the top to help it blend in a little bit better, because these layers here are going to interfere with how the drop shadow looks. So the first thing I want to do is I want to grab my move tool with the letter M, and I want to move it down so that it's on the floor right here. Let's go ahead and colorize it by going to Colors, Colorize, click here, and then select your drop shadow color. I'm going to go with black. Click OK, OK again. And now we're going to go back to Filters and add some Gaussian blur, a different amount this time, maybe a little bit more than we did last time. Too much. So I'm going to go to right around 15. That looks good. Click OK. Now we need to change the size of the drop shadow because the shadow's further away from her. So it should be a little bit smaller. Plus we need to change the perspective. So let's grab our Unified Transform tool right here, Shift+T, click on that layer, and then you can grab these corners and pull them in to change the perspective as well as change the size. I'm going to click right here and drag up so I can get these nodes over here, and I'm going to pull these in a little bit as well to make it a little bit smaller. Let's move it back here and let's flatten it out just a little bit more. And if you click on the outside here, you can actually rotate it a little bit as well, which is what I want to do. So right there, click Enter or Return. We have our drop shadow, but it's too dark. So let's drop our opacity down to help it blend in a little bit. So something like that. And now let's scroll down and select our original layer. Hold down your Shift key. Click right here to see the before and the after. How cool is that? I love it. All right, so if you want to continue elevating your GIMP skills, check out that playlist right there for more photo compositing and photo effect tutorials for GIMP. Thanks for listening and have an awesome day.